The Hudson Library and Historical Society presents the kickoff event of the 4th Annual Ohio Author Book Fair. Author Michael Grant Jaffe speaking of his new novel, When Blackness Was a Virtue. Interviewed by the award-winning reporter and producer for National Public Radio and WKSU 89.7, Kabir Bhatia. At the Hudson Library's Flood Meeting Room on July 14, 2014.
Now, our big week kicks off tonight with Cleveland author Michael Grant Jaffe, who's here to discuss his newly released book, When Blackness Was a Virtue. He will be interviewed by Kabir Bhatia of National Public Radio station WKSU. Please welcome Michael Jaffe and Kabir.
Welcome to Hudson. Thank you. You've been here many times, it sounds like.
I have.
Quite the fan base. And what makes you, first of all, what makes you want to come to a place like Hudson, to the Hudson Library, aside from the vast sum of money they're paying you this evening?
Aside from the fact that they asked me?
Yeah. What makes Hudson different, I guess, the experience here? Because you were in a different building last time, someone said, right? In a different building.
Yeah, God, that was a long time ago. I think that was my first book. Yeah, it just, you know, in the novels that I have written, in sort of my head, the towns are not unlike Hudson. They're kind of small, idyllic, Ohio-based towns. So I always feel that this is an offshoot of home, and it's also great inspiration.
Well, that's what brought you here physically, but you mentioned your first book, and the first book, and I may have these out of order, it's about an abandoned child, a father who's raising a child by himself, and then there's the divorced weatherman in your books. Now there's a father, he's got the, well, I don't want to give too much away, but it's a similar extrapolation from that in your most recent book, When Blackness Was a Virtue. Is there anything you want to tell us? Maybe how did you get to, as these progressively get more and more troubled?
Well, there's certainly a theme of abandonment, I think, in all of them, and I think the pull of home, of a place, is strong in each of them. You know, none of that was by design. I think I just sat down for each of them and had the kind of germ of an idea, and that turned into something else. I think the second book has a pretty strong, my second novel is called Skateaway, and that has a pretty strong kind of cohesive family unit. They're kind of quirky, but I don't think anyone in there is divorced or abandoned. So, but it just, you know, it just turned out that way. I'll keep that in mind the next time.
Well, it's a little of art imitating life, if you wanted to talk about that a bit. You live in Shaker, and you have 2 daughters. We were talking before; they're teenagers, and you're raising them by yourself.
Well, no, I have them for half the time, and yeah, I mean, that's not something that I considered as I was writing it. It just kind of sort of happened, and I imagine at some point my girls will read the book and they'll see parts of their lives and they'll say, wow, that something like that happened to us, or this didn't happen at all. But that's sort of the nature of fiction, and you know, we're as fiction writers, we're kind of whores, and we just take it all and use it however we can. So it's whether it's happened to us or happened to other people that we know. But certainly there are parts of my life that you know, there are parallels with this book. But people would be surprised at the things that are taken from real life and that aren't. It's usually not the stuff that they think.
You mentioned that you wrote for magazines, still do occasionally. Are there stories you come across in your reporting, little bits of stories, things that then, I'm imagining, find their way into your work in a much bigger form, like the whole thing with the bookie? Yeah.
I mean, you know, again, you're always observing, and I was telling someone the other day, I once did a story on a college basketball team, a small team in Wisconsin, and I spent a few days with these young guys, and really sort of got to know them to the point where they started, by the end of my time with them, were very, very comfortable with having me around. And so at one point, one of the guys said to me, hey, ask Joe about the hair on his arm. So I did, and he rolled up his sleeve, and his arm had there was no hair on it. And they said, and I asked him why that is. And it turns out that during games when he wasn't playing, he'd get real nervous, and he'd chew the hair off his arms. So to me, as a writer, that's pay dirt. Now I haven't used that yet. I used it in the magazine story. But those are the kind of details that you're always looking for, that this incredibly quirky guy who gets nervous, you'd never think that, as a writer, your imagination, I don't even think it would take you there. But the idea that somebody offered that is so great. So that's mine. I'm gonna use that.
The next book.
The next book.
Put that in there. This book, you were writing it in a sort of secluded upstate New York cabin, and was that this book or was it the last?
Well, all of the books, my family has a house in Western New York, in Chautauqua, New York, and so I'm lucky enough to get a chance to go up there in the off season, and there's really nobody there, and it's great because it's just quiet, and there's nothing to do really but read and write. And the first time I went up, I was living in New York City, and I had never written, this for my first novel, I had never written a novel before. And I thought, all right, I don't remember the figure, but let's say I'm gonna write 5 pages a day. And so I sat down and I started, and it just didn't work that way. And it was sort of a great educational experience for me to realize how I write and how I work, my sort of work process. And I thought, well, whatever I do on a given day, that's what it's gonna be. And some days, it may be half a page, other days it may be a page and a half, but to not sort of limit myself, or set a page limit.
Did you find that coming from journalism, without the deadlines and the pressure and the page count that you had to meet or the word count, that it was almost more difficult with too much freedom?
No, I'm pretty good about that kind of stuff. I try to get it done as quickly as I can. But I'm a very kind of slow, methodical fiction writer, and so I'd like to be able to be like some of these writers who can do a book a year or 2 books a year, and that just is never going to be me. I just kind of labor over each sentence and go back and tinker, and so. So for me, just finding what works for me.
And you mentioned that the girls have not read the books. They're not forbidden.
No.
Or are they? Okay.
No, they're not.
Because there's some, for a 13-year-old, it might be, oh my goodness, they're wondering what's Dad doing at night, going out as a bookie or whatever.
No, they absolutely have they've shown no inclination whatsoever to look at anything that they find it absurd that I do what I do. That I'm unlike most of their friends' fathers, put on a suit and go to work every day. They see me all the time. I wear sweatpants or shorts, and the idea that once every 4 or 5 years this kind of thing happens and I go out and I sign books is just, they still don't have a grasp on it. But neither of them has shown any interest in reading. At some point I guess they'll pick one of them up and maybe ask questions about it, but they're certainly not forbidden. There are many other books that they would rather read.
So they're not just sitting on the iPad all day, right?
No.
Readers,
oh, they're readers. No, they're absolutely readers. Yeah.
They haven't gotten yours yet.
Yeah.
So the current book, When Blackness Was a Virtue, and you mentioned a little that there's bits and pieces in there that I hate to say stolen. You've congealed everything.
Yes.
Together. Where does the characters, I guess, maybe you want to talk about where did you go to think, I want to make this a really dark place, where he's got this awful ex, and to make ends meet, he's got to do some crazy things.
Yeah, I mean, I went through a divorce, and when I came out of that, I was in a dark place. And so I knew as I was working on whatever the next project would be, which turned out to be When Blackness Was a Virtue, I knew it was going to be dark. because I had a lot of that pent up inside me, and it just was the direction that I was going in. And so it was important for me. In short, it's the story of a divorced father who has shared custody of his two young daughters, and he works as a greeting card salesman, but then he moonlights collecting money for a big-time bookie. And one of the things that I wanted to do was show that this is essentially a guy who's a good person who's doing the wrong thing, but for the right reasons. And so he ends up getting physical a lot of the time when he goes on some of his collections, and there's a sort of dark undercurrent to that. But you also see his playful side, and you see when he's around his daughters and how that completely changes his mood, and how you'd probably say he's a pretty good parent, but maybe not the best guy you want to hang around with in a bar.
Is there a section that you want to maybe read?
Sure. Let's see. So he has two daughters. The older one is named Callie, and the younger one is named Tig. So I'll read this one little section. This afternoon, there's only two of us. Callie's at a friend's house working on a math project. In the rearview mirror, I can see Tig's head cocked sideways. She vigorously scratches her chin with the eraser of a pencil. Dad? Yes, hon. My wipers squeak in the steady rain. They're old and brittle, turning my windshield into a slurry mess. I have to crane my neck and squint to see the road. How come boys' underpants have lines on them? Lines? You know, she says, touching the pencil to her lips. The lines in front. It takes a moment before I realize what she means. Oh, I say, chuckling. They're actually overlapping flaps of fabric, so boys can stand up when they go pee. What do you mean? Well, I pause, trying to think of a delicate explanation, one that will make sense to a 7-year-old girl. Sometimes when boys only have to go pee, not poop, I nod my head. Sometimes when boys only have to go pee, they stand up, and they poke their penises through the slots in their underpants. That way they don't have to unfasten their belts and pants and undies. Girls don't pee standing up? No, they don't. Do boys ever miss the toilet and pee on the ground? A large truck pulls in front of me, splashing the car and my clouded windshield with a fat slap of water. I suppose they do. Have you ever peed on the ground? Gee, I hope not, I say, smiling back at her. At least not on purpose. She giggles. Maybe somebody could walk into the bathroom while a boy's peeing, and he could turn and... She takes a quick breath. Get pee on them. Yuck. She's now laughing harder, kicking at the back of the front seat. That'd be gross. Oh, you're just being silly, I say, stealing another peek in the mirror. She jiggles with delight, lifting her legs so I can see the dimpled soles of her sneakers. I wonder what causes her to think of these things. Did someone put the idea in her head? Her little mind racing from one disconnected subject to the next? Juice boxes, ID bracelets, 10 extra minutes of recess. Even the overlapping flaps on boys' underpants. New words, awkward and unpronounceable, that sail through her consciousness. Half the time she doesn't know what they mean, just a collection of familiar symbols. Several months ago, I remember the two of us watching a TV commercial that featured a couple in a long embrace. Why are they sexing? She asked, struggling both with form and definition. In truth, sexing could have meant any number of things to her. Sprinting down a beach, rubbing someone's back, the soft arch on the inside of a person's foot. Before we reach the next intersection, she nods her head contentedly. Maybe she's satisfied with her image of some boy accidentally urinating on his father's shoes. Or perhaps she has moved on, thinking about popcorn or amusement parks or a song on her radio earlier in the day.
That sounds like something that must have happened in real life.
It did not happen.
It did not?
It did not.
No.
Completely made up.
You just conjured this.
I did.
But as a parent, you must have, when they were younger, even now, just the random question out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a writer, you have to be a good observer. And so, my first novel was about, Dance Real Slow was about a father and his young 4-year-old son, and they live in this fictional town in Kansas. And one of my great fears was that, and at the time I was not married, I didn't have any kids, that parents were going to read this book and say, well, this isn't how it is at all. And so I was grateful that that wasn't the case. But things would come into my head. So at one point, the 4-year-old boy was in the kitchen with his dad, and he walked up to the back, the screen door, and his nose itched. So he walked up to the screen and rubbed his nose against the screen. Now, I didn't see that, but it seems very plausible that a 4-year-old boy, that he would use that texture, the kind of coarse texture of the screen, and rub his nose on it. So you kind of observe, and then you take those pieces and you try to fit them in and make them as believable as you can. So I'm glad you thought it happened.
Yes, definitely. It sounds so true to life. But also in there you mentioned the wipers and cranier as a slap of the thing. At the beginning you've got quite the beat down in the book and that sort of thing. It always seems like there's an air of menace about, at any moment that car could have spun out and gotten crunched under the truck. I mean, you don't know, obviously, when you're reading it. Was that a conscious decision?
Certainly at some points it was. I liked, I was focused certainly at the beginning of kind of lulling people in and having them see this grandmother and her grandchildren, and then there's maybe a sense of menace there, and then it turns bad pretty quickly for her. So yeah, that was, I hadn't done that with any of the other 3 books, so that was certainly something that I was thinking about, to keep the reader kind of moving forward.
It's like a constant in this book, to keep your toes in place, for lack of a better word. And when you were writing this, the reason I brought the cabin up earlier, I'd read how you had a certain playlist. Oh. Was it this book? That's why I couldn't remember if it was this one. Uh-huh. And you had the playlist of things, and it's very melancholic type things. Was that a conscious decision? What fed, and what did that feed in you as you wrote?
Yeah, absolutely. Also, the first time I went to the cabin, the house in Chautauqua, it was too quiet, and I could just hear all sorts of little things, and that was distracting. So I put music on, and that became a habit for me to listen to music at a very low level, but it almost just above white noise, and that kind of drowned out anything else. And I realized that if I was writing a scene that was, one of these menacing scenes or melancholy, I couldn't have some upbeat music. So, it was definitely a conscious decision that I would look for songs or musical artists that were kind of fitting the mood that I had on a given day for a particular scene.
Oh, so you would pick it and then write. You don't feel that you would just put something on and at the end of the day, oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, I would, yes, right. It's sort of the direction that I was going in. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll hear a song and that will kind of stir something else up in me, and so then I'll go back when I'm writing and maybe I'll put that song back on, or I'll put something on that has a similar mood to it.
I know there's a lot, for a few people in the audience that are authors or enjoy writing. Do you, as you get that page and a half done every day, do you go back and reread it that day? Do you leave it? Do you wait till you've got 50 pages a chapter? How do you go back and revise as you do it? Oh, I hate this. How does it work?
Yeah, I usually hate a lot. So yeah, I mean, I'll write. Let's say I write a page, and then typically I'll go back at the end of that day and go through that page. And then the next day when I start, I'll start on that page again and go back through it again and tinker and tweak. And sometimes I'm appalled and scrap the whole thing. But what that does for me is usually when I finish the first draft of the book, it's usually in pretty good shape. There's typically not a lot of line editing that needs to be done when I go back through it. Now, I go back and still revise, and I create new scenes, and take some stuff out, and then my agent will read it, and he'll have suggestions, and then the editor, and so on. But I know that it's not. Hopefully, it's not a mess when I'm done with it. Other writers work in different ways. I know friends of mine who are writers who will just crank it out and will write hundreds and hundreds of pages and then cut and revise and then get something done. And I don't work that way. Yeah.
When you were finished, did you look back at this particular one, Blackness Was a Virtue, and think this is too, I don't want to say close to home, but it's pretty dark? Was it something maybe you considered, should I lighten it up? Should I keep it locked in a drawer for myself 20 years from now?
I wouldn't know. But what I did do was, it was actually significantly darker even than it is now. And so my agent read it and he said, you're going to have people walking off ledges with this. So he had a couple suggestions, and I went back and tweaked it and toned it down a bit. And then my editor had some more suggestions, so we did that a couple times. So the version you see is sort of like, when Blackness Was a Virtue light.
When grayness was a virtue.
Correct.
When you were finished and you felt, okay, this is to a point where we can bring it out, was there did you think about, what will people take away from this? Will they look at their neighbor and think, I wonder what this guy is doing outside of here when I don't see him? What's his background? What did he used to do? What circumstances would drive him to something crazy? I didn't give that too much thought. I just felt as though I hope it entertains them, and I hope they see sort of both sides of this guy and recognize that this dichotomy, and that there's people out there who are who may be struggling, who are forced, their hand is forced for whatever reason, and it takes them down a road that maybe they would normally choose not to take. Do you feel, we mentioned how your other books, at least two of them, and sort of a similar type of characters in each one, do you feel like this is the last time you want to go to this well?
I hope so. Yeah, I hope, but I don't. You just don't know. You start writing. I didn't necessarily have this in mind when I got going, and then it turned out there was more there, and so I started mining that. But as a writer, you're just grateful to get anything down, and so I'm working on the fifth novel now, and I think it's very different than any of the other ones, but I won't really know till I'm done.
Another 4 or 5 years, probably, right? Could be. I hope not. I'm just saying.
Hope not, too.
Let's say 2. We'll leave it at that.
It won't be 2.
You'll be back here very quickly. We'll put it that way. Is there another excerpt you wanted to read?
Oh.
Look, I saw a couple that were marked up.
Boy, okay. Well,
it's much more interesting than hearing me to hammer on. So.
But should we read the first part? Is that too dark?
I keep trying to. How do I not give things away? But that's the first thing they're gonna read.
All right, let's read that.
Yeah. Maybe stop at a crucial point, then they'll want to go read the book.
Okay. Let's see. The light in the first floor window is operated by a timing device. Each evening before dusk, it suddenly illuminates, casting a tangerine glow behind a pair of loosely drawn curtains. There are 4 copper-plated numbers tacked to the doorframe, slanted from high to low. The narrow walkway leading to the house is bordered by flower beds teeming with snapdragons, tulips, and wild geraniums. A coil of candy-striped rope, perhaps a child's toy, dangles from a second-story gutters. Another splash of color, a yellow and blue circular from a local pizza delivery, among a thorny web of hydrangea branches. Today there was rain. The concrete steps are still dark with water. In the distance comes the steady hum of a lawnmower. Then the faint smell of burning charcoal. I watch two squirrels skitter across the lawn, chasing each other in drunken parabolas around the trunk of a broad sugar maple. More time passes before a green Buick pulls into the driveway. The woman is talking to someone as she climbs from her car. After a moment, the rear doors flare open, nearly in unison, revealing two young boys with matching backpacks. "It's not the kind of macaroni I like," says the boy on the passenger side, the one with longer hair. "Well, I can fix you a sandwich," says the woman, "or we might have some leftover brisket." She searches for the house key, balancing a grocery bag on her hip. It's not until they reach the side door that she notices me, crossing the street at an easy pace, careful not to draw attention to myself. The bag starts to slip before she catches it against her thigh. I jog the final few yards, taking the groceries from her and setting them on the pavement. "I'll be right there," she says, ushering the boys into the kitchen. "I'm hungry, Nana," says the boy with longer hair. "Okay." She wipes her hands on the tail of her blouse. "Go watch TV. You can watch TV. I'll fix you something to eat in a minute." "Hey, Marky," shouts the boy from inside the house. "Nana says we can watch TV." I smile because really there is nothing else. I remove a small notepad from the breast pocket of my jacket. Lillian Dowdy. She's older than I expected. My daughter got stuck at work. She leans against one of the door's hinges, her hands now pinched in the small of her back. "Those are my grandsons." She's breathing quickly, the air leaving her lungs with a short whistle. "I never would have, take it easy," I say. Reaching into her groceries, I remove 3 tomatoes from a paper sack. I motion for her to place the bag over her mouth and nose. She follows my instructions but continues talking. The words are strained, lost to crinkling paper and wheezy breaths. Then a noise from the door, one of her grandsons standing between the parted screen. "What are you doing, Nana?" "I just got lightheaded." She fans herself with the bag, trying to put the boy at ease. "I'm fine, honey. Just go back into the living room and I'll be right there." After the boy disappears, she returns the tomatoes to the bag, one at a time. She smooths out the front of her blouse and slacks. Please tell Mr. Eugene that I need a few more days." "Friday?" "Yes." The relief comes slowly, and when it's nearly upon her, I can almost see her mouth rise into the hint of a smile. "Oh, Friday would be good." She bends down and embraces the bag of groceries. "Please tell Mr. Eugene I'm sorry. It won't happen again." She takes a hesitant step toward the house, and another. Then she's half inside her kitchen. "Friday," she repeats. My foot is pressed against the base of the door. When she reaches for the knob, I lean forward with all of my weight. The edge of the door catches her above the right eye. There is blood, slow then fast. She staggers back. A red crease rises from the meaty ledge of her brow. She slaps at the counter, trying to steady herself as she moves into darkness. I hear her reading moans from behind the sealed door. "Friday," I say, walking down the driveway. Sitting behind the wheel of my car, I leaf through the pages of my notepad. I use an obscure brand of Japanese marking pens I've only been able to find at a local art shop. They have tiny tips, like the head of a needle, that work well with my precise style of handwriting. I remove one from my visor, where it's held in place by rubber bands. To the left of Lillian Dowdy's name is a small box that remains unshaded. Beneath a pair of horizontal lines, I've written her address, phone number, car model, and color. Last, parenthetically, is a dollar figure, $1,200, which I encircle. I also put today's date and, following an asterisk, a notation that she has 2 young grandsons. I didn't know about the boys.
Almost too vivid. That's hard. No, I'm saying as a reader, it takes you right there.
That didn't happen either.
No, I don't. I don't think so. But there's so many at the beginning. There's so many colored tangerine lights. This hydrangeas. So much color in there. It's almost like you're cinematographing, for lack of a better word, as you write this, and because you're visualizing it, obviously. But are you seeing this as if you picture the guy walking across the streets, then he jogs the last few?
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to give the reader a sense of, this could be Hudson, and this woman has come home from her picking up her grandsons, and it looks pretty idyllic, and all of a sudden some guy comes out of nowhere, and the reader's wondering, well, what's this about? And even at the end, I don't know, that's just the first 2.5 or so pages of the book. They're not sure what happened, and that's what I wanted, is to kind of hit the reader as she got kind of clobbered, and you're wondering what's going on. And in fact, one reviewer, I think GQ magazine, brought that up. They were kind of stunned that if you can make it through a grandmother getting clobbered in the first few pages, you're in good shape.
Oh, well, there you go. I guess, yeah, for anybody, really.
Yeah.
But it almost seems like you're writing a movie. Has there been, I know the book just came out, but has you been interested in this? I know
the first one was, Dance Real Slow was made into a movie called A Cool, Dry Place. And the third one, Whirlwind, was optioned, and somebody has done a screenplay of that. So, I think what they do is they try to find somebody who has a lot of juice in Hollywood, like Tom Cruise, and if he's interested, they make it. And then this one, we're in the process of looking around right now. So, I think it would be a great movie, but that's just me.
Should we open up for questions from the audience? Does anyone in the audience have a question? Any sort of question? Mrs. Turkle always asks.
I was going to say, Susan,
I have 10 questions. I enjoyed hearing about your process, and I wondered, do you ever go about face, you've written maybe the first draft and you say, oh, this main character, I don't even think it's a guy, I think it's a woman. I mean, do you find yourself sticking with the characters, or that, there's this inner sense of saying, you know what, it's not a question that it's not working, it's just, I think there's a truth in fiction. And you can't make our characters do things they wouldn't normally do. So do you find that when you're writing the draft, you say, you know what, I don't think they would have done that, or I don't think that's kind of like real life, you think you know something.
Yeah, I think because I'm so close to it, and because I go back again and again, I have a pretty good sense that, well, I think this is what they would do. But certainly, as I mentioned, I have an agent and an editor who will both tell me, this didn't seem believable. And that's my biggest fear always in writing, if somebody said, I didn't believe this. So I will definitely go back if somebody says that and cut it or tweak it or revise it. Because that, as I said, that's for any fiction writer, that's their biggest fear.
So I just have one more question. I was curious, when you are so involved in the book and these characters seem real to you, do you ever dream about them? So do you ever have a dream and then you think, oh, I've got to do that, or oh, I can't believe I'm meeting you here?
Not really. No. Geez, I haven't had a dream about them yet. I'm thinking about them a lot, and so when I'm in the midst of a project, I'm not great to be around. You can certainly ask my daughters of that I'll maybe, if I spend a day working and I'm really into it, and then that evening it's like I've been in a car accident or something. I'm kind of loopy because it's just racing through your mind and you're thinking about maybe what you wrote that day or what the next step is. And I think that's probably true for most artists. You know, they sort of live two lives, and I think just there's a delicate balance trying to be normal.
I was just wondering, did you always envision yourself a writer, or was there another career choice before you started writing?
Yeah, I think I always wanted to be a writer. I mean, it's certainly, you know, I guess the story I always tell is when I was in 7th grade, we had I went to school around here. I went to Hawkins School, and when I was in 7th grade, they had a short story writing contest at the school, and I wrote. We all were required to write the short story, and I finished 3rd or 4th or something, and I'd never won anything ever. And so the idea that, wow, this is something that I might be okay at. And from that point on, I always had really terrific English teachers that were encouraging, and I really liked creative writing. And so I just kept doing it. I did it in college, I did it in graduate school, and felt, even when I finished in graduate school, I thought, this is what I want to do with my life. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me came when I left graduate school. I ended up spending about 12 years writing for Sports Illustrated magazine. And while I was there, I got to a point where I finished my first novel. And that was a huge sort of leap of faith for me, because I felt as though I was really happy at Sports Illustrated. I loved the people there. It was a great job. But I felt as though that could be my life, that I could very easily end up spending the next 30 years there. And I knew that, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I knew that I wanted to write fiction. I knew that I wanted to write novels. And so at that point, I kind of took this leap of faith and went out sort of on my own, and we tried to sell the first novel. Unfortunately, we had some success, and that was enough to kind of get me to write the second and the third and the fourth. So yes.
Always a writer. Other questions from anyone? Thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much for coming out. Thanks for having me.
Thanks to the management and staff of the Hudson Library and Historical Society for their assistance in the production of this program and for sponsoring the 4th Annual Ohio Author Book Fair. Production facilities for this program were provided by Hudson Cable Television, your window to the community. If you have comments or questions on this or any HCTV program, please leave us an email message at hctv@hudson.oh.us or call us at 330-653-2500. We'd love to hear from you.